What if everything you believed about life was wrong? What if the way you live, the things you pursue, and the beliefs you hold were shaped not by truth, but by societal conditioning? Socrates is often regarded as one of the greatest philosophers of all time, yet much of what he understood about life is still ignored today. His teachings challenged the way people think, urging them to question their beliefs, seek wisdom through self-examination, and embrace the pursuit of truth above all else. However, in the modern world, many of his insights have been pushed aside in favor of comfort, conformity, and distraction. We claim to value knowledge, but few people engage in the kind of deep thinking that Socrates encouraged. We seek certainty rather than questioning, validation rather than wisdom, and external success rather than inner fulfillment. One of the most profound ideas Socrates taught was the concept of knowing that you know nothing. This paradoxical statement is not an admission of ignorance, but an acknowledgement of the infinite complexity of reality. Most people assume they understand the world, that they have solid opinions and beliefs that are beyond question. But Socrates saw this as the greatest barrier to wisdom. The moment you believe you know everything, you stop learning. The greatest minds throughout history have been those who constantly questioned themselves, who remained open to the possibility that their understanding was incomplete. But today, we live in a society where certainty is prized, where people cling to their beliefs and resist anything that challenges them. We surround ourselves with information that reinforces what we already believe, rather than exposing ourselves to new perspectives. We avoid questioning because it is uncomfortable, and in doing so, we shut ourselves off from true wisdom. Socrates also understood that the unexamined life is not worth living. This is one of his most famous teachings, yet it is perhaps the most overlooked. Most people go through life without deeply questioning their choices, values, or the narratives they have been given. They live according to societal expectations, pursuing careers, relationships, and lifestyles that they have been told will bring happiness, without ever stopping to ask if these things truly align with their own values. Self-examination requires courage. It forces you to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself, to acknowledge your flaws, to question whether you are living authentically. But without this process, you risk living a life that is not truly your own. Socrates also believed in the power of dialogue as a tool for discovering truth. He did not lecture people or impose his views on them. Instead, he asked questions. He engaged in dialectic conversations, helping others uncover contradictions in their own thinking. This method, known as the Socratic method, is still used in philosophy and law today, but it is rarely applied in everyday life. Instead of engaging in meaningful conversations that challenge our perspectives, we often engage in arguments where the goal is to win rather than to understand. Socrates believed that wisdom comes from discussion, from being willing to change your mind when faced with better reasoning. But in today's world, changing your mind is seen as weakness. People cling to their opinions, defending them at all costs, rather than seeing conversations as opportunities for growth. This refusal to embrace open dialogue has created a culture where people fear being wrong. Instead of seeing mistakes as opportunities to learn, they see them as personal failures. Social media has amplified this problem, where discussions quickly devolve into attacks rather than thoughtful exchanges. Socrates would argue that true strength lies in humility, the ability to admit when you are wrong and grow from it. The greatest thinkers are those who seek to refine their understanding, not prove their superiority. If we could learn to approach conversations with curiosity instead of defensiveness, we would rediscover the wisdom that Socrates tried to teach the world. Another lesson from Socrates that we ignore is his belief that virtue is the highest good. He did not measure a person's worth by their wealth, power, or status, but by their character. He believed that a life well lived was one guided by moral integrity and wisdom. Today, success is often defined in material terms: how much money you make, how influential you are, how much recognition you receive. But Socrates would argue that none of this matters if you do not live with virtue. A person who acts dishonestly or pursues power at the expense of others is not truly successful, no matter how much wealth they accumulate. In a world where corruption, greed, and self-interest often dominate, Socrates' message is more relevant than ever. Socrates also emphasized the importance of living in alignment with truth rather than popular opinion. He was sentenced to death because he refused to conform, because he continued to ask questions that made people uncomfortable. He could have chosen to escape his fate, to renounce his beliefs in order to save his life, but he did not. He accepted death rather than compromising his principles. This level of integrity is rare in today's world, where people are often willing to sacrifice truth in exchange for social acceptance. Many people censor themselves, avoid controversy, or conform to groupthink out of fear of rejection. Socrates would remind us that truth should never be sacrificed for comfort or approval. Another aspect of Socrates' philosophy that remains relevant is his belief that true happiness comes from within. He rejected the idea that external achievements, wealth, or status could bring lasting fulfillment. He argued that happiness is a byproduct of wisdom, virtue, and self-mastery. Today, many people seek happiness in material possessions, relationships, or career success, only to find that these things bring temporary satisfaction at best. Socrates would argue that the only lasting form of happiness comes from knowing yourself, from cultivating inner peace, and from living in accordance with your deepest values. Instead of chasing happiness externally, he would encourage us to focus on developing our minds, strengthening our character, and living with integrity. Socrates also recognized that fear, especially the fear of death, prevents people from living fully. He did not fear death because he believed that no one truly knows what comes after life, and that fearing the unknown is irrational. Instead of being paralyzed by fear, he chose to focus on the present, on living with purpose and wisdom. In today's world, fear is a dominant force. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of the future. But Socrates would tell us that fear is often based on illusions, and that the only way to overcome it is through reason and understanding. Despite the timeless nature of his teachings, Socrates' wisdom is often ignored because it challenges people to step outside of their comfort zones. It forces them to question deeply held beliefs, to embrace uncertainty, and to prioritize wisdom over convenience. His philosophy is not for those who seek easy answers, but for those who are willing to engage in lifelong learning and self-exploration. The question is, are we willing to listen? Or will we continue to ignore the wisdom that has been available to us for over 2,000 years? Socrates understood that life is not about accumulating things, achieving status, or seeking validation from others. It is about understanding yourself, questioning everything, and living in alignment with truth and virtue. If we were to embrace his teachings rather than ignore them, we might finally begin to see the world and ourselves more clearly.